I wake up every morning with two thoughts. Number one, how do I make my bosses more money? And number two, how do I get some of it? And when I put it like that, there isn't anybody that's not going to be receptive to what I want to say, because they recognize that my number one mission is to make sure they're successful. And when you have that kind of mentality, it opens the floodgates, because it makes an inordinate amount of people receptive to what you're bringing to the table, because they know that you're trying to create something that they stand to benefit from as well.
Much later.
What I will say to you, however, is I am incredibly valuable. I know this. I'm number one at the network, and that matters because I contribute to the bottom line. I don't bleed it. I add to it. I'm not a prisoner to the ESPN Walt Disney family. Everything that I said is true. And it goes right out the window the second they say, bump you. You need us. We don't need you.
Wow. Talk about contradicting yourself, Stephen A. That's why I call Stephen A. Smith Stephen A. Myth. It's just what he does, man. This is Sports Guy talking that you guys are watching and listening to. I am Dustin Tran, your host, as I am here today to talk about Stephen A. Smith being accused of using Pat McAfee in order to get a new deal at ESPN. As you guys know, Pat McAfee is getting paid $17 million per year, while Stephen A. Smith is getting paid just $12 million per year. With Stephen A. Smith's contract coming up, it is expected that Stephen A. Smith will ask for $25 million per year. Before I say anything else, though, I want to present you guys with the topic question. So, here it is. Will ESPN be able to keep Stephen A. Smith on their network in the long term? I truly believe that ESPN will not be able to keep Stephen A. Smith on their network, and I say that because Stephen A. Smith is making outrageous contract demands. This man is asking for $25 million per year. Are you kidding me? A sports TV talker? Seriously? Stephen A. Smith is pretty entertaining sometimes, but Stephen A. Smith is not worth $25 million per year under any circumstance. Joe Buck and Troy Aikman are not even making that kind of money, and those guys have been the premier sports commentators for a long time. You look at how those guys have been on the number one broadcast team in football for a very long time, and even they're not getting paid that kind of money. Pat McAfee is getting paid $17 million per year, and that feels like a massive overpay at ESPN. And even though Stephen A. Smith is more valuable to the network than Pat McAfee, is Stephen A. Smith really $25 million per year kind of valuable? Of course, Stephen A. Smith is not that valuable at ESPN. You know what ESPN could do nowadays? They could just say to Stephen A. Smith, kick rocks, start your own network, start your own show, go independent full time, or maybe even join another TV network, and we'll be fine with Shannon Sharpe as the main star of First Take. First Take doesn't need Stephen A. Smith the way that it did 2 years ago, or whenever Max Kellerman was on First Take. First Take needs Shannon Sharpe more than First Take needs Stephen A. Smith. And obviously, Stephen A. Smith has to realize that he does not have the negotiating power in this situation. We all know that Stephen A. Smith is a pathological liar. That's why I call him Stephen A. Myth. Remember the time where he talked about hitting 17 straight threes in a high school scrimmage? Yeah, obviously that story never happened, but we all know Stephen A. Smith is a pathological liar. That's what Stephen A. Smith does. And we all know that Stephen A. Smith is a grifter. We all know that Stephen A. Smith wants to sell out for the money. We all know that Stephen A. Smith also wants freedom in his decision making as well. The question for ESPN and Stephen A. Smith is going to come down to money versus freedom. What does Stephen A. Smith value more? Does Stephen A. Smith value freedom, or does he value money more? If Stephen A. Smith values money, then I expect Stephen A. Smith to be back at ESPN. But money cannot buy happiness. Everybody knows that deep down the heart. Even the grifters that literally live their lives in order to just steal money from people. They all know that money at the end of the day doesn't resolve those kind of issues. Having a lot of money is nice, but that's not going to be the only thing that defines you in life. Happiness and freedom defines values in America, and Stephen A. Smith is an American. Whether he'll tell you or not, we all know that Stephen A. Smith holds American values deep down. We all know that Stephen A. Smith is not actually woke, and that he's only being woke on ESPN because the bosses at ESPN are telling Stephen A. Smith to be woke, because Stephen A. Smith is a coward. Stephen A. Smith is not brave whatsoever, and he doesn't know how to stand on business whatsoever. We all know that Stephen A. Smith will say whatever the network wants him to say in order to get a paycheck at ESPN. Now, the question is, though, is Stephen A. Smith willing to sacrifice his freedom in order to get paid $25 million per year at ESPN? I said a year ago that Stephen A. Smith was going to ask for record-breaking money in order to stay at ESPN. And what has happened now? Stephen A. Smith has asked for record-breaking money in order to stay at ESPN moving forward. I knew when ESPN overpaid Pat McAfee that Stephen A. Smith was going to ask for an outrageous contract at the time. Obviously, $25 million a year for a sports talker is outrageous money. I don't even care if you're the most accurate predictor of all time or if you're the most entertaining sports talker in television history. Nobody is worth $25 million per year on TV. You want to do that, you can go ahead and be independent. But I think Stephen A. Smith is throwing out that number because secretly he doesn't want to be at ESPN anymore. Stephen A. Smith wants freedom, and I think Stephen A. Smith is going to use Pat McAfee in order to drive up his own value because he knows Pat McAfee is valuable in today's world. Even though Pat McAfee has been sucking in mainstream media, Pat McAfee in the digital world has been awesome. And you look at how Pat McAfee has changed the game in the digital world and how people are following his YouTube channel more than ever. Obviously, you look at how Stephen A. Smith, he's trying to start his own YouTube channel, he's trying to start his own show, and he is trying to talk more about things outside of sports. There's a reason why he's been talking smack about Will Smith recently. It's because Stephen A. Smith wants to make a name for himself in the political world, in society world, and in the entertainment industry. We all know that Stephen A. Smith is trying to diversify his knowledge. He wants to be known as more than just a sports talker. Even though Stephen A. Smith is not very good as a sports talker, we all know that his knowledge on sports is quite frankly limited. And yet this guy wants to get paid $25 million per year to stay at ESPN. Are you kidding me? Just because you can draw an audience better than Pat McAfee doesn't mean that you're actually that good as a sports talker. I look at what Stephen A. Smith is talking about. His knowledge of sports is quite frankly limited. He's just a loudmouth guy that likes to yell into the camera. And quite frankly, you realize that Stephen A. Smith doesn't really have much expertise on anything other than being a loudmouth and being able to follow instructions from the woke masters at ESPN. That's why you see Stephen A. Smith go woke sometimes. It's not because Stephen A. Smith is actually woke. It's because of the fact that he is following what ESPN is telling him to do, because we all know ESPN is a woke sports network and Stephen A. Smith will say whatever in order to get the money. You look at what Stephen A. Smith said in 2021. He talked about how he wanted to make his bosses money, and then he wanted to get some of the cut. And then you look at how Stephen A. Smith completely contradicted himself in 2024. Now he's getting angry that he's not getting paid enough money, even though in 2021 he said he was getting paid enough money. So which one is it? Stephen A. Smith needs to make up his mind either way, and it's clear that Stephen A. Smith is a fraud individual. He's not authentic, and that's why a lot of people are getting sick of listening to Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith lacks authenticity in a world where the entire mainstream media has gone very inauthentic. That's why a lot of people are listening to YouTubers like myself, and that's why a lot of people just prefer to listen to independent media. You look at how the mainstream media coverage of Bronny James was completely biased, and that's just one example of it. You look at how Bronny James was absolute garbage when he actually played in summer league and when he played in college basketball. But if you ask the mainstream media, oh my God, Bronny James, he is an incredible player. He just tries so hard when he's on the basketball court. Please, please, please praise him. Don't criticize my boy Bronny just so LeBron James can be happy. Man, this is why a lot of people get mad with mainstream media, and people like Stephen A. Smith is one of the reasons why people are getting mad at the mainstream media. It's because of inauthenticity, and if there's one thing that people cannot stand when watching mainstream networks, it's inauthenticity. And obviously Stephen A. Smith is the face of being inauthentic. We all know that Stephen A. Smith is all about the money. Show me the money, and he'll say whatever it takes. If it takes Stephen A. Smith to be gay, he'll absolutely do it. That's the kind of guy Stephen A. Smith is. We all know that Stephen A. Smith has no morals. He has no values. And when you have that kind of lifestyle, yeah, you're going to end up being a puppet for the mainstream media, which is exactly what Stephen A. Smith has done. Ultimately, though, I think Stephen A. Smith is going to go independent, because you guys have to remember that money doesn't buy happiness. freedom buys happiness. Stephen A. Smith knows that freedom is more important than money. Stephen A. Smith has made more than enough money in his lifetime, and even though he loves that money, and even though he's a sellout, I think even Stephen A. Smith realizes the importance of freedom in his career. And you can tell that Stephen A. Smith has been getting somewhat tired of having to listen to his mainstream media bosses because of the fact that he's been constantly complaining this past year on the Stephen A. Smith show, and that tells me Stephen A. Smith is going to go independent sooner rather than later. I also think ESPN is now going to fork over $25 million per year for Stephen A. Smith, so that is why ESPN will not be able to keep Stephen A. Smith on their network in the long term, as those contract negotiations have caused tension with other ESPN staff members. Remember, go ahead and subscribe to Sports Guy Talking, like the video, and please comment down below. If you guys do that, I may shout you guys out in my Instagram story every Monday. That will be for the @DustinNasTran Instagram account. Make sure to follow me on Instagram @DustinNasTran and at Sports Guy Talking. Also, go follow me on Twitter @DustinNasTran. Again, go ahead and do those things that I just told you guys to go do. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the content that was just produced. Peace out. I hope you enjoyed that video. Want more Sports Guy Talking, the home of great sports content? Make sure you click that subscribe button to get the latest from Sports Guy Talking. Go ahead and like the video. Comment down below. Check the description box on the video in order to follow my Instagram and Twitter. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from the YouTube channel, Sports Guy Talking.